Thank you very much. Were you surprised when it was actually me that got the medal? Were you? You could feel the tension building, couldn't you? Who will it be? Thank you. I am genuinely humbled to have this award. I was thinking earlier that being humbled isn't a normal feeling, is it? I don't often feel humbled, disparaged, humiliated, you know, put down. But humbled is a rather old feeling, isn't it? It's not a modern emotion. But I do feel it, and particularly to have this award in the name of Benjamin Franklin, who was the most remarkable man. He lived nearby in Craven Street. The house is a few minutes away, and I really recommend that you go and take a look at it. It's just been opened, just been renovated. It's a very powerful evocation of the life of this extraordinary figure. A man who was deeply involved in the growth of industrialism, at the heart of the Enlightenment, at the heart of the creation of the New World, and with a passion for education. A man who was also deeply invested in science, in the arts, in the humanities, and in politics. A polymath, I think, a Renaissance figure in the heart of the Enlightenment. And one of the first significant members of the Royal Society of Arts. If you don't know this institution, I really encourage you to find out more about it. It was founded, I think I'm correct in saying, in 1753 by William Shipley. And its full name is the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce. And it's had a long history in the promotion and advocacy of appropriate forms of public education. I have had a long association myself with the RSA. I gave a lecture here, even Matthew may not know this, in July of 1990. In this very room. And I propose to repeat it word for word, if that's all right. I don't see why I should waste time thinking of anything fresh for you, frankly. No, no, in 1990, I had been running a National Arts in Schools project, and I had published a book on the arts in schools. I have a great passion for the arts, and we were meeting here shortly after the introduction of the national curriculum in England, which profoundly misunderstood the place of the arts in education. So I was talking about how the arts could be made part of the mainstream of education. And here we are, 17 years later, when it's all so different, I feel. So I want to say a few words about that, and I want to show you a couple of short movie clips, and then to have a conversation with you. One of the things that's happened to me since 1990 is that I've moved to live in America. And I moved there 7 years ago at the invitation of the Getty Center. I didn't flee Great Britain, but put yourself in my place. I had a phone call on the 3rd of January, 1990, when I was living near Coventry. And this guy said, "Would you like to come and live in California?" We left immediately. I didn't ask what the job was, we just went. And the phone is still swinging on the hook, actually, in the house. And we hope one day the children will track us down, but we don't care. But I now live in America, and I love it. Who's been to Los Angeles here, anyone? It's an extraordinary place. We were in Las Vegas recently, my wife and I. We've been together for 30 years, and we decided last year to get married again. So we went to the Elvis Chapel. Now, I recommend it. You should do it. We had the Blue Hawaii package. But there are others. But with the Blue Hawaii package, you get the Elvis impersonator, 4 songs, the chapel, of course, a puff of smoke as you go in. You have to request that. And a hula girl. That was optional. But I opted for it, and for reasons I was rather pleased about, frankly. For another $100, we could have had a pink Cadillac. But we thought that was a bit tacky. You know, frankly. We thought that was lowering the tone of the whole occasion, frankly. But I mention it because Las Vegas is an iconic example of the thing I would like us to talk about. Not Las Vegas in itself, but the idea that gave rise to it. If you think of it, every other city on Earth has a reason to be where it is. Like London, you know, it's in a natural basin, so it's good for trade, or it's in a harbour, or it's in a valley, so it's good for agriculture. You know, or it's on a hillside, so it's good for defence. None of this is true of Las Vegas. There is no physical reason for it to be there. The only reason it's there is the thing that gave rise to this organisation, that affects every aspect of your life, which makes humanity what it is. The only thing, in my opinion, which is the extraordinary power which is bestowed on human beings that no other species has, so far as we can judge. I mean the power of imagination. We take it totally for granted. This capacity to bring into mind things that aren't present, and on that basis to hypothesize about things that have never been, but could be. Every feature of human culture, in my view, is the consequence of this unique capacity. Now, other creatures may have something like it. Other creatures sing, but they don't write operas. You know, other creatures are agile, but they don't form Olympic committees. They communicate, but they don't have festivals of theatre. They have structures, but they don't build buildings and furnish them. We are unique in this capacity, a capacity that's produced the most extraordinary diversity of human culture, of enterprise, of innovation, 6,000 languages currently spoken on Earth, and the great adventure which produced, among other things, the Royal Society of Arts and all of its works. But I believe that we systematically destroy this capacity in our children and in ourselves. Now, I pick my words carefully. I don't say deliberately. I don't think it's deliberate. But it happens to be systematic. We do it routinely, unthinkingly, and that's the worst of it. Because we take for granted certain ideas about education, about children, about what it is to be educated, about social need and social utility, about economic purpose. We take these ideas for granted, and they turn out not to be true. Many ideas which seem obvious turn out not to be true. That was really the great adventure of the Enlightenment. Ideas that seemed obvious that turned out not to be true. Ironically, though, I believe the legacy of the Enlightenment is now hampering the reforms that are needed in education. We have grown up in a system of public education which is dominated by two ideas. One of them is a conception of economic utility. And you can illustrate that directly. It's implicit in the structure of the school curriculum. It's simply present. There is in every school system on Earth a hierarchy of subjects. You know it, you went through it. If you're in education, you probably subscribe to it or you contribute to it somehow. When we moved to America, we put our kids into high school. And it was recognizable. The curriculum was totally recognizable. Math, science, and English language at the top. Then the humanities, the arts way down the bottom. And in the arts, there's always another hierarchy. Art and music are always thought to be more important than drama and dance. There isn't a school in the country that I know, sorry, a school system, let me be clear. There isn't a school system actually anywhere that teaches dance every day, systematically, to every child in the way that we require them to learn mathematics. Now, I'm not against mathematics, on the contrary. But why is dance such a loser in the system? Well, I think one of the reasons is people never saw any economic point in it. So there's an economic judgment that's made in the structure of the school curriculum. And I'm sure it was true of you. You probably found yourself benignly steered away from things you were good at school towards things that other people advised you would be more useful to you. So effectively, our school curricula are based on the premise that there are two sorts of subject. useful ones and useless ones. And the useless ones fall away eventually. And they fall away especially when money starts to become tight, as it always is. George Bush was in town today, wasn't he? I just thought I'd share the pain. That was all. I'm feeling it. No, President Bush, as I call him, was responsible, with others, for a cross-party piece of legislation in America to reform public education. And I have lots of conversations about it now I live in America, which I shall keep saying, by the way, to make you feel bad, okay? I live in California. And you don't. So there you go then. No, when I got to America, I was told that the Americans don't get irony. This is not true. This is a British conceit. But I feel okay about it, because there are other ones. When we went to America, we were given a guidebook of how to behave in America. Honestly, by our removals agent. How to behave in America. I'm handing it out to all the Americans I meet now. Look, you do it, you do it. You know, let's all behave properly, shall we? But one of the things it said in it was, don't hug people in America. They don't like it. Honestly, it's explicit. Don't hug them. They don't like it. This turns out to be nonsense. They love it. People, in my experience, love getting hugged in America. But we thought they didn't. So for the first year, we had kept our arms at our side at social gatherings. The fear of giving offence. And this all added to the idea that we typified British Reserve. You know, or that we're some refugees from Riverdance. You know, but I was told the Americans don't get irony. And then I came across this piece of legislation in America called No Child Left Behind. And I thought whoever came up with that title gets irony, because this legislation is leaving millions of children behind. Of course, that's not a very attractive name for legislation, millions of children left behind, I can say that. But give or take a twiddle, it's the 1988 Education Act in this country. It was the manifesto, pretty much, that inspired the work of Chris Woodhead, I believe, during his time at Ofsted. Now, I think this is important, because what it represents to me is the ideology of education writ large, and that's the problem. So when we talk about changing paradigms, my firm conviction is that we have to do much, much more than is currently happening. Every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. I don't know of an exception. Mind you, what's new? We've always been reforming public education, but we're doing it now consistently and systematically all over the place. There are two reasons for it. The first of them is economic. People are trying to work out, how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century? How do we do that, given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week, as the recent turmoil is demonstrating? How do we do that? The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out, how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle? Most countries, I believe, are doing what we were doing in 1988, operating on the premise that the challenge is to reform education to make it a better version of what it was. In other words, the challenge is just to do better what we did before, but improve. And we have to raise standards. And people say we have to raise standards if this is a breakthrough. Like, really, yes, we should. Why would you lower them? I haven't come across an argument that persuades me of lowering them. But raising them, of course we should raise them. The problem is that the current system of education, in my view and experience, was designed and conceived and structured for a different age. It was conceived in the intellectual culture of the Enlightenment and in the economic circumstances of the Industrial Revolution. Before the middle of the 19th century, there were no systems of public education. Not really. I mean, you could get educated by Jesuits, if you had the money. But public education, paid for from taxation, compulsory to everybody and free at the point of delivery, that was a revolutionary idea. And many people objected to it. They said it's not possible for many street kids, working class children, to benefit from public education. They're incapable of learning to read and write, and why are we spending time on this? So there's also built into it a whole series of assumptions about social structure and capacity. But it was designed for its purpose, which is why, as the public system evolved in the 19th and early 20th century, we ended up with a very broad base of elementary education, junior schools. Everybody went to that. My father's father, my grandfather, he went to that. He left school by the time he was 12. Most people did then, at the turn of the century. And then gradually we introduced a layer above it of secondary education, and some people went into that, but my father left school at 14, having gone into that. And then a small university sector sat across the top of it. And the assumption was that people would work their way up, and a few would get to the top and would go to university. It was modelled on the economic premises of industrialism. That is, that we needed a broad base of people to do manual blue-collar work, and roughly they could do language and arithmetic. A smaller group who would go to administrative work, that's what the grammar schools were for, and an even smaller group who would go off and run the empire for us and become the lawyers and the judges and the doctors, and they were the universities. Now, I simplify, but that's essentially how the thing came about. And it was driven by an economic imperative of the time, but running right through it was an intellectual model of the mind, which was essentially the Enlightenment view of intelligence. That real intelligence consists in the capacity for a certain type of deductive reasoning and a knowledge of the classics originally, what we come to think of as academic ability. And this is deep in the gene pool of public education, that there are really two types of people, academic and non-academic, smart people and non-smart people. And the consequence of that is that many brilliant people think they're not, because they've been judged against this particular view of the mind. So we have twin pillars, economic and intellectual. And my view is that this model has caused chaos in many people's lives. It's been great for some. There have been people who have benefited wonderfully from it. But most people have not. And it's created a massive problem. I spoke at a conference, the TED conference that Matthew referred to. One of the other speakers was Al Gore, or Al, as I refer to him. Al Gore gave the talk at the TED conference. By the way, if you don't know the TED conference, I do recommend you visit the website, TED.com. It is fantastic. But Al Gore gave the talk that became the movie Inconvenient Truth. Al Gore's view, which isn't his, he'd be the first to say it, it dates back to Rachel Carson and earlier. It actually dates back, if you look, even to the work of Linnaeus in the 18th century. It dates back to Franklin. It dates back to the work of this society. A concern with the ecology of the natural world and the sustainability of industrialism in the 17th and 18th century. We were concerned about it. But his work is an attempt to put the case back into a modern context. I believe he's right. And it's not just his view. A group of geologists have recently published a paper in which they argue that the Earth has entered a new geological period. Classically, the view is that since the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago, we're in a period called the Holocene period. They believe we've entered a new period. And they say if people were to, a future generation of geologists were to come to Earth, they would see the evidence of it, of a change in the Earth's geological personality. They would see it in the evidence of carbon deposits in the Earth's crust, the acidification of oceans, the evidence of the mass extinction of species, the change in the Earth's atmosphere, and 100 other indicators. They say it's unmistakably, in their view, a new geological period, and a series of Nobel scientists have agreed to this view. They're provisionally calling this not the Holocene, but the Anthropocene. What they mean by that is a geological age created by the activities of people, as in anthropos. And they say there's no historical precedent for this. And this is really what I want to get to. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, William Shipley, the great figures of the Enlightenment, both in politics and science and the arts, were conceiving public education and civic structures and politics of duty at a time of revolutionary turmoil. It was the age of revolutions in France, in America, not long after our civil disturbance here, at a time of extraordinary intellectual adventures and new horizons, extraordinary innovation. For them, there was nothing really that had ever led to an age of such innovation and such extraordinary change, the rate of it. And it was a fair characterization of the times. But there's every evidence to show now that what was happening then is as nothing to what is happening now. I believe the changes taking place on Earth now are without precedent in terms of their character and their implications. And our best salvation is to develop this capacity for imagination and to do it systematically through public education and to connect people with their true talents. We simply can't afford this devastation anymore. So when Al Gore talks about this, I believe him. And I think if you don't think there's a crisis in the world's natural environment, then you're not paying attention. And I would take the option to leave the planet soon, really. But you see, I believe that there is a parallel climate crisis. Now, one of them is probably enough for you, honestly. You might think, no, I'm fine, one is good. You know, I don't need a second one. But there is a second one. And it's what my work is about, and I guess what many of you will be concerned about, and I know what EDGE is concerned about and what Matthew and the RSA is currently concerned about. But let me put it a particular way to you. I believe there is a global crisis, not in natural resources, though I believe it, a global crisis in human resources. I believe that the parallel with the crisis in the natural world is exact. And the costs of clearing this up are catastrophic. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. In California, the state government last year spent about $3 billion on the state university system. This is their published figures. They spent over $9 billion on the state prison system. Now, I cannot believe that more potential criminals are born every year in California than potential college graduates. What you have are people in bad conditions going bad. I remember Bernard Levin once, he wrote one of his articles in the Times, he said he'd been at a dinner party, and he was asked, the question around the dinner table was, are people mainly good or mainly bad? And he said without hesitation, they're mainly good. He said, and I was astonished to find I was in the minority around the table, a minority of one. But he believed with Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and saw his parents die, that for all of that, people are fundamentally good. I believe they are fundamentally good. But there are people living in very bad circumstances and conditions. And if you put people in poor conditions, they behave in particular ways. So we spend a lot of our time remediating the damage. And meanwhile, I think that the other exact parallel is that pharmaceutical companies are reaping a gold rush from this distress. But if you look at the growth of antidepressants, of prescription drugs to treat depression, to suppress people's feelings, this is a gold rush. I mean, pharmaceutical companies don't want to cure depression. On the contrary. One of the things I saw recently is that suicide rates among 15 to 30-year-olds have increased over 60% globally since the 1960s. It's one of the largest causes of death among young people. What is that? You know, people born with hope and optimism who decide to check out because they can't cope. Now, I don't say education's part of that or responsible for it, but it contributes to it. That's really all I want to say. So this crisis of human resources is, I think, absolutely urgent and palpable. So the challenge for me is not to reform education, but to transform it into something else. I think we have to come to a different set of assumptions. Now, I say this advisedly because I've been involved in all kinds of initiatives over my professional life. I started out in drama work. I ran a big arts and schools project. Some of the people in the room I've known for years and have worked with for years, and I've had a long association here. One of the great initiatives of the RSA in the 1980s was Education for Capability. You should look at Education for Capability. It said extraordinarily useful and practical things, and there were wonderful people around it. Charles Handy, who I've got to know recently, well, not recently, but I've got to know well in recent years, who was chairman here of the RSA. Tyrrell Burgess, Corelli Barnett, Patrick Nutchins. I shared an apartment when I was a student with Patrick's son. and a galaxy of really powerful thinkers. John Tomlinson, who was chairman here for a while, who was with me at Warwick University. There has been a long tradition of arguing for the change, arguing for the alternative, and yet successive governments come in and do what they did before. And this really worries me, and I speak personally, that after all the optimism I felt 10 years ago, I feel that we've had, over the past 10 years, a kind of myriad of policies, but too few principles. I can't see what they've added up to. And I say that because I didn't see it before, and I don't see it anywhere else. I mean, there are some countries which I feel are getting this right, but we're not. And the reason is because we're not fundamentally changing the underlying assumptions of the system, which are to do with intelligence, ability, economic purpose, and what people need. We still educate people from the outside in. We figure out what the country needs, then we try and get them to conform with it, rather than seeing what makes people drive forward and building education systems around a model of personhood, which is what I think we should come to. So I just want to show you a couple of quick slides to... I don't have to, but as I've gone to the trouble of preparing them, frankly, I just want to give you an example of a couple of things here. Oh, by the way, some of these things, as Matthew kindly said, are in this book. This book, by the way, is terrific. Okay? You could not do better than buy this book. That is, unless you buy this book, which is the new book, which is coming out in January from Penguin. I'm very excited about this book. This book is about the nature of human talent and how people discover it. It's based on the premise that people do their best when they do the thing they love, when they're in their element. So I was trying to get to grips with what that is. What is it to be in your element? And I spoke to scientists and artists and business leaders and poets and parents and kids. And it seems to me the evidence is absolutely persuasive that when people connect to this powerful sense of talent in themselves, discover what it is they can do, they become somebody else. And that, to me, is the premise of building a new education system. It's not about reinforcing the old model, but reconstituting our sense of self. And it happens to synergize, is that a verb? I'm not sure, with the new economic purposes. There are two big drivers of change currently. One is technology, you know that. This is a brain cell. What I just want, I'm not going to dwell on it, but what I want to underline is that technology is moving faster than most people really truthfully understand. Can I ask you, how many of you here consider yourself to be baby boomers or older? I thought so. All of you, who is not? Who consider yourself to be a Generation Xer or a millennial? Okay. You boomer types and older, actually, no. If you're over 30, would you put your hand up if you were wearing a wristwatch? There we go, thank you. Just curious. Now, no. This is interesting. Ask a room full of teenagers the same question. Ask them if they wear wristwatches. They mainly don't. And the reason is, I want to make 2 points. The reason they don't wear wristwatches is because they don't see the point. Because for them, time is everywhere. You know, it's on their iPhones, their iPods, their mobile phones, it's everywhere. You know, why would you wear this? I mean, my daughter can't understand why I would put a special device on my wrist to tell the time. You know, and she said, plus this only does one thing. It's like, how lame is that? You know, like a single-function device. So have you cracked up? But we take it for granted, don't we? You have other options, but this thing about taking it for granted is important. It's the things we take for granted that we need to kind of identify and question. I mean, did you think about putting your watch on this morning? Truthfully, was it like an agony? Shall I? You know, is it a watchy day? I just don't know, really. I'll put it on to be safe. You know, you don't do, you just do it. Our kids don't, and it points to something important. A guy called Mark Prensky made this point, that our children live in a different world. He talks about the difference between digital natives and digital immigrants. If you're under 20, you're an immigrant, you're a native, you speak digital, you were born with this stuff, and it's in your head like a first language. We're less so. But the point is, this is getting faster and faster and faster. One of the new horizons is likely to be the merging of human intelligence with information systems. That's a brain cell, and that's a brain cell growing on a silicon chip. Well, we'll see. But there are things that lie ahead for which there are no precedent. And the impact on culture promises to be extraordinary. This is the other thing I want to point to, which is the curve of the world's population. You see, 1750, when the RSA was being established, and William Shipley was wondering what to do in the evenings, there were about 1 billion people on the whole of the Earth, pretty evenly distributed, mostly in the far-flung parts of what became the empire, but a lot of them in the what would become the industrialized economies. About 1 billion people. London was a tiny place, by comparison. Now, if you look at this curve, we're at around 6 billion. And the big jump happened in 1970. Well, from 1970 to the year 2000, where the population of the Earth increased by over 3 million. 1968, you remember, was the Summer of Love. It's probably a coincidence. Yeah, but we all did our bit, you know. That's all right. But this is the interesting thing. The dark line is the growth of population in the developed economies. The real growth is happening in the emergent economies, in Asia, Africa, parts of South America, and so on. And it's heading to 9 billion. The other thing that's happening is that the world is becoming increasingly urbanized. At the beginning of the 18th century, into the 19th century, most people lived in the countryside. About 3% of people lived in cities. Of course, the great social movement of industrialism was the migration to the cities. But even so, at the turn of the 20th century, it's still something less than 20% of people lived in cities. Currently, 50% of the world's population lives in cities. 50% of the 6 billion. And we're heading to 60% of 9 billion people living in cities. Not here, not in UK, not in America, not in the rest of Europe, but in the emergent economies. Now, this massive migration is without precedent. So these aren't going to be groovy cities, you know, with information booths and property taxes and Starbucks. These are massive, sprawling, vernacular cities, probably more like this. This is Caracas in Venezuela, a massive and rapidly growing metropolis. But Greater Tokyo at the moment has a population of 35 million people, which is more than the entire population of Canada in one place. Now, by the middle of the century, there may be 20 megacities, over 500 cities of 1 million. You can see my point here, that these are unprecedented circumstances, an unprecedented drain on the Earth's resources, an unprecedented demand for innovation, for fresh thinking, fresh social systems, fresh ways of getting people to connect with themselves and have lives with purpose and meaning. Education is a major part of the solution. The problem is, I believe, we're backing the wrong horses. There was a report by McKinsey recently which showed this. This is in American figures. In America, since 1980, more or less, spending on education has increased 73% in real money. Class sizes have gone down to historically low levels. But on this indicator, literacy, there's been no change in achievement. More money, smaller classes, no change. Dropout rates are increasing. Graduation rates are declining. It's a major problem. The problem is they're trying to meet the future by doing what they did in the past. And on the way, they're alienating millions of kids who don't see any purpose in going to school. When we went to school, we were kept there with a story, which was if you worked hard and did well and got a college degree, you would have a job. Our kids don't believe that. And they're right not to, by the way. You're better having a degree than not, but it's not a guarantee anymore. And particularly not if the route to it marginalizes most of the things that you think are important about yourself. And one of the things that sits right in the middle of this is this idea that there are academic and non-academic kids. There's something called vocational training, which is not as good as academic education. The people who, with theoretical degrees are inherently better people than those who can do real craft and the kind of work which previously would have been venerated in guild systems. We have this intellectual apartheid running through education. And so lots of people try to defend it or to repair it. I think we've just got to recognize it's mythical, and we have to strip it out of our thinking. This is one of the consequences of it. Let me ask you another question. How many of you who are not... How many of you over 30 have had your tonsils removed? Be frank with me. Go on. Okay. I ask you this for a reason. again, it's things we take for granted. People of my generation, I was born in 1950. Now, I know you don't believe that. I can see the sense of incredulity sweeping through the room, right? How could it be, you're saying to yourself? Well, I live in Los Angeles, you know. I've had work done, what can I tell you? But, people of my generation, in the 50s and 60s, and in the 40s, I guess, the minute they had a sore throat, somebody pounced on them and took their tonsils out. That's true, isn't it? It was routine to have your tonsils removed. You could not afford to have a ticklish cough in the 1950s. Or somebody would reach for your throat in a peremptory way and remove your tonsils. It was routine. Millions of tonsils were removed in that period. What happened to them? We don't know. I mean, I believe it's a scandal. I don't know, but it's one of those things like Rockwell, you know, like Area 56, somewhere in America, you know, in a desert, there's this stockpile. Anyway, now the thing about this is this, that nowadays people do have tonsillectomies, but it's not common. It's unusual to have it done. You have to have a chronic case with no hope of it being repaired in some other way, to have your tonsils taken out. When I was growing up, they were thought to be totally disposable. We'll just whip them out and let's not have any more nonsense about them. And some people voluntarily had it done so they could get the ice cream. Our children, this generation, do not suffer the plague of tonsillectomies. Instead, they suffer this. This is the modern epidemic, and it's as misplaced and it's as fictitious. This is the plague of ADHD. Now, this is a map of the incidence of ADHD in America, or prescriptions for ADHD. Don't mistake me here. I don't mean to say there is no such thing as attention deficit disorder. I'm not qualified to say if there is such a thing. I know that a great majority of psychologists and paediatricians think there is such a thing. But it's still a matter of debate. What I do know for a fact is it's not an epidemic. I believe that these kids are being medicated as routinely as we had our tonsils taken out, and on the same whimsical basis and for the same reason, medical fashion. Our children are living in the most intensely stimulating period in the history of the earth. They're being besieged with information and calls for their attention from every platform, computers, from iPhones, from advertising holdings, from hundreds of television channels. And we're penalizing them now for getting distracted. From what? You know, boring stuff at school, for the most part. It seems to me not a coincidence totally that the incidence of ADHD has risen in parallel with the growth of standardized testing. Now, these kids are being given Ritalin and Adderall and all manner of things, often quite dangerous drugs, to get them focused and calm them down. Now, I know this is nonsense. Immediately you see this thing, because the lighter areas are where there isn't much of it. Now, I live in California. And people there won't pay attention for more than a minute and a half. You know, so, but according to this, attention deficit disorder increases as you travel east across the country. People start losing interest in Oklahoma. They can hardly think straight in Arkansas. And by the time they get to Washington, they've lost it completely. And there are separate reasons for that, I believe. It's a fictitious disease. And so, I don't say it's a fictitious condition, it's a fictitious epidemic. I was saying earlier, I have a big interest in the arts. And if you think of it, the arts, and I don't say this exclusively of the arts, I think it's also true of science and of maths, but I say about the arts particularly because they are the victims of this mentality currently, particularly. The arts especially address the idea of aesthetic experience. An aesthetic experience is one in which your senses are operating at their peak, when you're present in the current moment, when you're resonating with the excitement of this thing that you're experiencing, when you are fully alive. An anesthetic is when you shut your senses off and deaden yourself to what's happening. And a lot of these drugs are that. We're getting our children through education by anaesthetizing them. And I think we should be doing the exact opposite. We shouldn't be putting them asleep. We should be waking them up to what they have inside of themselves. But the model we have is this. I believe we have a system of education that is modeled on the interests of industrialism and in the image of it. I'll give you a couple of examples. Schools are still pretty much organized on factory lines, ringing bells, separate facilities, specialized into separate subjects. We still educate children by batches. We put them through the system by age group. Why do we do that? Why is there this assumption that the most important thing kids have in common is how old they are? It's like the most important thing about them is their date of manufacture. You know what I mean? Well, I know kids who are much better than other kids at the same age in different disciplines, or at different times of the day, or better in smaller groups than in large groups, or sometimes they want to be on their own. If you're interested in the model of learning, you don't start from this production line mentality. These are some of the key words in the industrial model. Utility, which shapes the curriculum. Linearity, which informs choices and the assumptions of what matters and what doesn't. It's essentially about conformity, and increasingly it's about that as you look at the growth of standardized testing and standardized curricula. And it's about standardization. Now, for reasons we'll come to just before we're done, I believe we've got to go in the exact opposite direction. That's what I mean about changing the paradigm. We have to question what we take for granted. The problem in questioning what we take for granted, say, is you don't know what it is. Just have a quick read of this. I love this quote. This, as you can see, is from Bertrand Russell. And it seems to me to be the quintessential question of Western philosophy. When it comes to what is this? Are we all that Hamlet thought we were, or are we just a kind of cosmic accident of no importance? I got really interested in this first part of the question, this small and unimportant planet. Well, how small? How unimportant is this planet? It's hard to get an image of this, isn't it? Because if you think of it, the distances of space are so vast. Like, for example, this is a picture from the Hubble telescope. This is the Magellanic Cloud. Well, distance in space is measured in light years, distance light travels in a year, which is far. Truthfully, I mean, that is further than Brighton, really. Now, that's 170,000 light years. I mean, can you get your head around that? It's just, it's big. And where does the Earth fit in all of that? The problem with getting any sense of how big the Earth is or small is the distances are so immense that they blur our perception of relative size. So I came across this image, set of images on the internet. I just quickly want to show them to you. I think they're fantastic. I've had them re-rendered for your benefit. These are pictures of, somebody had the brilliant idea of taking the Earth out of the sky and lining it up with some other planets in the solar system for purpose of comparison of size. So it's like a team photo, of some of the planets in the solar system and beyond. It starts with this. Isn't that great? I love that image. Now, there are a couple of things. I think we're looking good. That's the first thing to say about this. But there are a couple of things I want to say about it. The first is that I think we're less concerned than we were about being invaded by Martian hordes. Aren't we? I mean, bring it on, I feel. Don't you? Like, you in whose army, I think we're feeling. The second thing is that Pluto is no longer a planet. And frankly, we can see why now, can't we? I mean, what were we thinking? It's a boulder, frankly. So pull back a bit, though. And it's a bit less encouraging, isn't it? Don't you think? A bit less encouraging. And Pluto is a kind of cosmic embarrassment now, so we don't even... But we know the sun is a big deal. But how big exactly is the sun compared to the Earth? So this is... I checked this with some astrophysicists, and they said, yes, this would be about right. Here we are with the sun in the picture. Did you know that? But keep your eye on the sun, because that's not the biggest thing on the block. This is the sun against some other objects not in our solar system, but that you can see in the night sky. So Jupiter's 1 pixel now, and the Earth is gone. So we want to be friends with Arcturus. But keep your eye on Arcturus for a minute. So I think our best friend is Antares. I mean, that's extraordinary, isn't it? So go back to that, and we are infinitesimally, pitifully tiny in the great cosmic scheme. Now, I just want to say a couple of things quickly. The first is, whatever you woke up worrying about this morning, really, get over it, honestly. Make the call and move on. You know. But the second thing is this, that this may be, but we do have this extraordinary power. And I can put it this way. We have a power which enables us to conceive of our own insignificance. No other species on Earth is sitting around getting anxiety attacks over these images. You know, you don't see other species in little forest clearings saying, I had no idea. Did you? I mean, trust me, I wasn't expecting this. They weren't. And they didn't produce these images either. We have this extraordinary human power to conceive of objects and experience outside of our current experience, and to express them in conceptual and symbolic forms in ways that other people can engage with and grasp. And we are, therefore, the species that did produce Hamlet, and the work of Mozart, and the Industrial Revolution, and this extraordinary building with its amazing images, and hip-hop, and jazz, and quantum mechanics, and the theory of relativity, and air travel, and the jet engine, and all the things that characterize the extraordinary ascent of human culture. But we destroy it in the way we educate people. And I just want to end this and open it up for some conversation by giving an example of something. There was a great study done recently of divergent thinking. Published a couple of years ago. Divergent thinking isn't the same thing as creativity. I define creativity as the process of having original ideas that have value. Divergent thinking isn't a synonym, but it's an essential capacity for creativity. It's the ability to see lots of possible answers to a question, lots of possible ways of interpreting a question, to think what Edward de Bono would probably call laterally, to think not just in linear or convergent ways, to see multiple answers, not one. So, I mean, there are tests for this. I mean, one kind of cod example would be people might be asked to say, how many uses can you think of for a paperclip? One of those routine questions. Most people might come up with 10 or 15. People who are good at this might come up with 200. And they do that by saying, well, could the paperclip be 200 foot tall and be made out of foam rubber? You know, like, does it have to be a paperclip as we know it, Jim? You know. Now, there are tests for this, and they gave them to 1,500 people. This is in a book called Breakpoint and Beyond. And on the protocol of the test, if you scored above a certain level, you'd be considered to be a genius at divergent thinking. Okay? So my question to you is, what percentage of the people tested, of the 1,500, scored at genius level for divergent thinking? Now, you need to know one more thing about them. These were kindergarten children. Okay? So what do you think? What percentage at genius level? 80. 80, okay. Isn't that great? 98%. Now, the thing about this was it was a longitudinal study. So they retested the same children 5 years later, ages of 8 to 10. What do you think? 50? They retested them again 5 years later, ages 13 to 15. You can see a trend here, can't you? They tested 200,000 adults, 25 years and older, just once as a control. What do you think? Yeah. Now, I always say, if you're in business, these are the people you're hiring. Okay, the bottom? So, now, this tells an interesting story. Because you could have imagined it going the other way, couldn't you? You start off not being very good, but you get better as you get older. But this shows two things. One is, we all have this capacity. And two, it mostly deteriorates. Now, a lot of things have happened to these kids as they've grown up. A lot. But one of the most important things that happened to them, I'm convinced, is that by now they've become educated. You know, they've spent 10 years at school being told there's one answer, it's at the back. And don't look. And don't copy, because that's cheating. mean, outside schools, that's called collaboration, but inside schools. Now, this isn't because teachers want it this way, it's just because it happens that way. It's because it's in the gene pool of education. And to transform it, we have to think differently. Well, let me just quickly say this about that. We have to think differently about human capacity. This is what my book, The Element, is about. We have to get over this old conception of academic, non-academic, abstract, theoretical, vocational, and see it for what it is, a myth. Secondly, we have to recognize that most great learning happens in groups, that collaboration is the stuff of growth. That if we atomize people and separate them and judge them separately, we form a kind of disjunction between them and their natural learning environment. And thirdly, it's crucially about the culture of our institutions, the habits of the institution and the habitats that they occupy. I came across, if I just put my hand on it, a great quote recently, which seemed to me to capture some of this, about this distinction between ourselves and other species. And it says, if I can just find it, probably my other suit, isn't it? Do you think? It's about, here we go. I rather like this as a view. It says that when we come to assess people, we should be fairer with ourselves. It says, after all, human beings were born of risen apes, not fallen angels. And so what shall we wonder at? Our massacres, our missiles, or our symphonies? The miracle of humankind is not how far we have sunk, but how magnificently we have risen. We will be known among the stars, not by our corpses, but by our poems. And I believe there's a profound truth in that. We have it in our grasp to form systems of education based on these different principles. But it means a shift from the industrial metaphor of education to what I think of as an agricultural metaphor. If you think of it, if you look at the organizational chart of most companies and organizations, it looks a bit like a wiring diagram, doesn't it? If you look at the structure, like boxes and things are connected. But human organizations are not like mechanisms, even though these charts suggest the metaphor that they are. Human organizations are much more like organisms. That's to say, they depend upon feelings and relationships and motivation and value, self-value, and a sense of identity and of community. You know, the way you work in an organization is deeply affected by your feeling for it. Therefore, I think a much better metaphor is not industrialism, but agriculture, or an organic metaphor. I'm doing a whole project at the moment in the state of Oklahoma, where I'm trying to develop these ideas across the whole state. But I mentioned Las Vegas at the beginning. I'll just show a last image of this now. Not far from Las Vegas is a place called Death Valley. Death Valley is the hottest place in America. Not much grows in Death Valley because it doesn't rain. In the winter of 2004, something remarkable happened. It rained 7 inches. And in the spring of 2005, there was a phenomenon. The whole floor of Death Valley was coated with spring flowers. Photographers and botanists and scientists came from the whole across of America to witness this thing that they might not see again. What it demonstrated was that Death Valley wasn't dead. It was asleep. Right beneath the surface were these seeds of growth, waiting for conditions. And I believe it's exactly the same way with human beings. If we create the right conditions in our school, if we create the right incentives, if we value each learner for themselves and properly, growth will happen. And the growth always happens. Before we're done, I want to show you a couple of very short videos that will demonstrate, but we'll go into our discussion with Matthew just now. But I think we need to shift from this industrial paradigm to an organic paradigm, and I think it's perfectly doable. We need to conceive of institutions individually, not system-wide, as ones which don't just value utility, but respect and promote living vitality, the energy of the organization, and its potential to be transformative, that doesn't think in terms of linearity, but thinks of creativity and multiple options and multiple possibilities for everybody in it, that's not about conformity, but about diversity, and it's critically about customization. This is Death Valley in the spring of 2005. I think all our schools could be like that. Somebody once said the problem for human beings is not that we aim too high and fail, it's we aim too low and succeed. And I think we owe it to William Shipley and Benjamin Franklin to aim high. Benjamin Franklin once notably said, there are three sorts of people in the world: those who are immovable, those who are movable, and those who move. And I encourage you with the RSA to move and get a move on. Thank you.